everybody, this is Daniel.
It's Michelle.
And we're the LatinX Learners, and we're back after a hiatus, or sabbatical, if you want to use an academic term.
Forced.
Due to COVID, but we're back in person. It's been so nice to see you. We're going to jump right into this and get right back into it. So today's episode is called Charming Passivity. Do you want to talk about how we got here and what our thoughts were and how we came up with the title for today's episode?
He did it again, y'all. He didn't ask me how I was.
How are you,
I'm
Michelle?
Fine.
We've got a whole bunch of business to get through and a huge subject agenda here. But how are you?
I'm doing good. How's your mom and all them?
Good. All of them are great. Still fastidiosos, pero they're good.
Good. All right. Y'all know you have to saludar. You know how I feel about this. So I can breathe now. We can move on. So yeah, guys, we're going to talk to you about something that Daniel and I sat down and really hashed out at length together, something that we feel needs to be said. And it is around a topic that I think you'll recognize for sure, the idea of passivity within our culture. As Latinos, we are known for being agreeable, amenable, accommodating, making everything better for everyone. And there are a lot of beautiful things to that, but there are also some damaging effects to that behavior. And I thought we would give them the quote that you looked up.
So, the quote is, it's a quote I teach in my Mexican American Humanities course. And it's coming from a principal who's talking to the school board and school administrators during the Chicano movement. And there's an argument between the Chicano constituents about why there isn't representation on student government, student council at the high school, and why parents aren't involved. Mm-hmm. And the principal says Mexicans have a charming passivity. And I wouldn't want to take that away from them, would you? And it's a reflective question, right? It's a rhetorical question, and it's an indicting question and statement, and saying that, their disengagement in leadership at that level was really due to their culture and who they are, and we wouldn't want to change who they are because that's something really charming about them. As I teach that in the course, my students get infuriated, and every single time that I teach it, I get infuriated. And on a vacation this past summer, we went to the high school to actually see where a lot of these Chicano movements incidents occurred, and it was interesting to see the area because the area is charming. But in Boyle Heights, if you're from California, I wouldn't say that that's a passive area of Los Angeles. So really interesting. So that kind of really defines what we're talking about when we say about this charming passivity. What are other examples that we see in maybe students and scholars and higher ed administrators and Latinx people? What are passive actions and interactions you've had or thoughts that you've seen that help us to define this in different roles?
Well, I mean, I'm a Latina. So, hello subservience. Hello lifelong training to be passive, to make everything better for men in our lives, to serve the men before we eat ourselves. Maria Honey and I had this conversation about Thanksgiving one year. And she told the story of how she decided to shake things up a bit at Thanksgiving and take back some ownership and demand that, no, that's not how we do things. And in doing so, in trying to flip the script on her family, in fact, on her mother, who loved the custom, who appreciates the custom, who embraces that custom, hurt her feelings. And so that is, I think, an example of how passivity is everywhere within our culture, and when we try to challenge it, it doesn't always go the way that we think. Other examples of it, I think, are our emotional intelligence.
What do you mean by that?
Well, my grandmother taught me, she said things like this: Mija, when your husband is upset, don't make it worse. Like if he comes home and he's angry, and he used to come home angry a lot, thanks prior career, but just make everything better, and have the house clean, and no disrespect about any of these things, right? But have the house clean, make sure the kids are quiet, make the tone of the house And she started saying these things when I was young, and I watched her do it as well. And so that bred this ability to read people, because I was constantly paying attention to how men felt around me. And that translated to how is everyone feeling around me? How are my teachers behaving?
Yeah.
Me being quiet, observing, and then using my observations to make things better.
Yeah.
So that's another example of passivity.
It's interesting, when I think of the passivity in my life and how I was indoctrinated into this culture, my mom, we would be in the store, or my dad, and we'd get to a natural intersection in the store, and they'd have a basket and we'd have a basket, and we'd, take a step forward, and they're both inching, and it would always be like, yeah, mijo, let them go, go ahead, yeah, go ahead, yeah. We'd be in church, and somebody would cut us off in the communion line. Go ahead, y'all go ahead and go first, right? We'd open the door for others. And for, I think, my parents, it was a sign of respect for elders, others, people in the community, and I saw it the same way. But how do other cultures and how do people really perceive Latinos in general, Latinx people, when there's this thought of charming personality or charming passivity, and what does that entail, right? And so we talk about these two examples of it from a female perspective, and then from a male perspective, learning and doing it. But what were those behaviors like? And you shared a little bit of it in terms of being passive. But when do you think, as a culture, we might not be passive anymore? Is passivity bad for our culture? And not only that, but in your own self-recollection, do you have moments in your life that when you think about, I stopped being passive at this point, or this incident happened, therefore, I can think of one or two for me, but how about you?
I'm thinking about something we discussed earlier. So y'all know how it is when, you're talking, the adults in the room, right? Gente grande, and the kids come in. What's the first thing that you say?
Leave the room, because this is grown folk talk.
This is not for you. You do not need to be in here. Go away, orejas, right?
And it's all chisme.
Right.
It's all chisme. The abuela's talking about the daughter-in-law's rice. That was cochina.
We weren't organizing and being activists or anything like
No,
that.
this was gossip,
talking
right?
about societal issues. No, we weren't.
But la señora from church, did you see what she wore?
It was important stuff at the time. So with our own children, Brock and I, we had that habit also of, they can't be in the room when the adults are talking. And if Nanny and Papa were talking, if Mimi's talking, you need to leave the room if the adults are talking. And I started to kind of think recently, right, after this past 18 months especially, why do I do that? And especially because I follow Latinx Parenting.
Yeah.
On Instagram. Do you follow them?
I don't.
Amazing.
I am a Latinx parent, and let me tell you, we probably don't agree.
Well, let me tell you, whoever is running that is pushing back on the damaging parts of the parenting that we experienced.
Yeah.
And I think by teaching my girls, because they're the older two, that they shouldn't be in the room when adults are talking, I'm limiting their behavior. I'm limiting their ability to operate and leverage their skills, emotional intelligence and social skills, to fight for themselves.
Well, and you think about the message that it's sending, right? You're not grown enough for this. You can't develop thinking skills about this. You shouldn't be engaged in this conversation. So where do they take those examples, and where do they take those experiences and go to the workplace or go to higher ed and see adults talking and think, I shouldn't interrupt.
Exactly.
I shouldn't advocate for myself.
Exactly.
I shouldn't stand up and say, oh yes, what's your name at the financial aid counter, because you've told me twice 2 different things, right?
What's your ID badge number? Okay, so we've given some examples, right? I think some pretty good ones. I think you get it. But let's move on. Let's talk about breaking out of it. So I don't know that there's a specific breakout moment for me when I kind of dropped the passivity and took ownership of myself. But what about you? Was there a moment that you can remember where that kind of fell away and you came into your own?
I think so. I think, when I think of being passive, I think of the examples that I shared with you earlier in terms of growing up and mom and dad inherently teaching me these passive activities that were just kind of indoctrinated in me through nature and interactions with folk.
And nurture.
And nurture, right? But when I think about when did I stop and at what point, it goes to this story that, there was this moment in 10th grade where I had been passive majority of my life, and passive being, quiet, reserved, respectful. So passive not being I won't speak, I won't write, but second
I can't imagine that at all. I'm sorry.
second to in the room to talk, allowing others to go first, really taking a back seat and a back seat role and things. And as I think about those things, they were rooted in areas of, shame and embarrassment for the environment I was living in, and compared to my friends and others, and we'll get into that later. But, when you think about it, I look back in this moment, and it was 10th grade, and I was in the marching band, and my older sister had been in marching band for years, and my parents had been band boosters, never the president of the band boosters, never an officer, but just band boosters, supporting,
yes,
here, whatever you need. If you need the tacos in the morning, I'll make them, the tonta that does whatever, loading the ice chest, all those kind of things, And so they knew about band, they knew it, and we had gone to all the marching contests for my older sister and those things. And so when I think of these moments, I think of this opportunity where the band director said, hey, we're having drum major trials for next year. And you should think about, coming to the meeting and hearing about what it takes to be a drum major.
I did not know this about him, and I worship drum majors, so this is big.
And so I went to the meeting, and I didn't tell my parents. I said I had after school program or something, and I went to the meeting, and they gave us this form after they taught us everything that we needed to know, and tryouts were the following week, and you were going to go, and you were going to try out, and if you made it, you had to spend, $150, $200 on this drum major camp for the summer. Therefore, your parents had to sign this form saying that they committed to sending you to drum major camp.
Of course.
Fun times at drum major camp. Anyway, so I take it home, and I've got the week to figure out how I'm going to present it to my mom and dad, which really is my mom. My mom's the head of the household, right? So I've got to convince mom how it is.
As she should be.
So we're driving to my grandmother's one day, and it's just me and her in the car, and I thought, this is a perfect opportunity. So the drive was, a block.
Okay.
We didn't live far away from each other.
Wasn't a long talk.
No. And so I said to Mom, here's this form, and, Mr. Whitus, who was our band director, had said maybe I should think about trying out, and where did you hear about this? And I said, well, I went to the meeting, and then immediately, cabron, you lied to me, and you didn't tell me you went to this meeting, and me not telling her the truth is primary, yes. Right? Not what I want to do or anything, right. And so we got through, and we're talking about it, and then I showed her the paper and everything, and she says to me, and it was a real life experience that I think that we all at one point in time are going to either have to have a discussion with our children or have had about the role that race plays in society and in leadership and all of that, right? And she said, and this is from my mom's constructed reality of living in a rural small town in Texas,
sure,
in central Texas. She said, you're Hispanic. Who else was in the room? And I said, Tyra Cooksey, and Tyra was black, and a couple of other white kids. And she said, what makes you think that the Rockdale High School band is going to put a man and a black girl in the front of this marching band, and y'all are going to be able to lead the band? And I don't think she said it out of malice, right? Because you're a mother, right? But she was saying it to protect me, my feelings, my thoughts, my perceptions, perhaps my constructed reality that might have been false.
Sure. Based on her experiences. Which you have to respect. And so I said to her, just let me try out, we'll see. And it wasn't hurtful at the moment. It was astonishing that the role of race was finally discussed, and that she had a perspective on it, right? Because for so long, I didn't have a perspective on it, no. But she had a perspective, and she never shared that perspective with me until this moment. So race had never been a limitation to you, personally?
In my perception, correct. But I think she had seen some things that
rose-colored glasses?
Yeah,
or
ignorance.
Okay.
Yeah, ignorance, and when you don't know any better, you just go with the flow. And so she said to me...
And you were passive.
Passive.
So why would it affect you as much?
Why would it affect it? Maybe it just wasn't my time. Maybe it wasn't meant for me.
Or you didn't notice it.
Maybe I didn't notice it, right? And so I go and I try out for drum major, and lo and behold, I got head drum major for the next 2 years, and Tyra got assistant. And, she was a life friend of mine while I was in high school, and we don't keep in touch, but I know she's on Facebook, and hopefully she'll see the episode. But
way to go, Tyra.
But she and I went to camp together. We had great times, and we led the marching band, and really, becoming a drum major taught me so much because I was passive and now I had to have this voice. I had to have this voice
Yes.
of leadership, of command, of authority, that this little Mexican kid didn't have before, right? And not
I
only
think that's fascinating.
and not
that
only
you
that,
didn't have it before, and then suddenly when you do get it, you're
Overnight.
Daniel, right? Go big or go home.
Overnight, right?
I'm going
I'm
to
not going home.
command the masses with the mere turn of my head or the mere raising of my hand. You went from passive
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah, and I think it was instinctively in me.
That's
it
a
was who I
breakout
was,
moment.
right?
Mhm.
But it was a challenge to the notion of being passive
It was
in my
percolating.
culture, right? It was my outbreak moment.
How did your family react?
They were proud. They were at every game. They had drum major button, the big
Yeah,
button with
once
my
he
face
made
on
it,
it,
right? Once he made it.
And they
Once you weren't
knew.
a disappointment,
Yeah,
right?
and they went to the camp and dropped me off and paid the money. Mom sold breakfast tacos to get it right. So it was all endorsed and supported, but it was a moment for me that I look back in reflection. And first I get pissed that Mom had the conversation with me, but it was a real conversation. And it was a conversation that needed to happen. But I also, look back and think of how far and we had come, because in her eyes we hadn't come that far. So it was a realization for her. But it was
Well,
also
you certainly advanced the family.
Yeah, it was also a realization for me that there were people outside of my culture who would allow my culture, me, to grow and develop in these leadership opportunities. So
Allow,
right? Because they had authority. The band director was going to select who was
Always.
going to be the drum major, and he didn't have to select me. But I was the best. Let's not get that crossways, right? So
But no. There's no question there. I'm ruminating.
and there I was on
right?
the podium conducting, and you think about the conducting, right? Not only conducting the marching band, but having command and authority of the entire football field.
Of course.
Because the audience is silent when you're on the podium.
Of course.
Right? Your hands are up and raised at attention, ready to conduct. And so that really gave me the spirit of breaking my culture, breaking
out of that
right?
the constraint of passivity.
Yeah, of being passive.
And here's what I think about that. First of all, that is an incredible story, and I'm so proud of you, and I wish I had known you back then to watch that happen. But what I think of
I
is
don't think we would have been friends.
I think of course we would have been friends.
No, you were on the dance team.
I was amazing. I would dance to your music.
Yeah, but the
Oh
dance
my
team was
gosh.
always they were the girls that
He's not
nobody
going-
ever wanted to talk to the band guys, and it wasn't just the guys, but any band folk.
I was not like that. Clearly, I was not like that.
But continue.
Okay. Remember I said yes when you said you want to do LatinX Learners. Okay. No, but I think about our students, and I think about the idea that there are these magical moments in life. There are. You're proof of that. So my experience with a breakout was just not that dramatic. I think for me, I was just like you. I was quiet. I was passive. I grew up very poor, which we know, which I've shared. I grew up enduring things that children shouldn't have to endure. So I was very introspective. I was constantly watching. And growing up with a grandparent versus a parent,
Yeah.
and not having a lot of younger people around me, I was always attuned to adults and adult things. So I was thinking all the time and really just trying to not upset anything. But I realized at a very young age that I could write. And so the things that I couldn't say, because I wasn't going to rock the boat, I wasn't going to challenge authority, I wasn't going to disrupt the model of subservience from the culture, came out in my writing. I started writing songs. My first song was, I think I was 5, and then another one when I was in 3rd grade. I was writing poetry for my friends. I still have my 7th grade journal. I believe Rosalinda Gomez gave it to me, and I still have it with all of the poems that I wrote for my friends. And so there were just kind of advances, within me of recognizing the power of the written word. And that translated into music, songwriting and singing. That translated into acting. That translated into, being able to operate as a speaker, even in high school. And so for me, even though I still not subscribe, but default to these passive behaviors sometimes, especially within my family and my extended family, there is something inside of me that is a constant reminder that I'm not actually tied by that. I'm
Yeah.
not constrained by passivity.
Mm-hmm.
I can evaluate it, I can recognize it, but because of my writing voice, I feel that that is where it all. When I start writing, I don't know what happens. I don't know where I go, but I'm completely not wherever I am.
And you're not passive.
And I'm not passive. I'm completely in control of every word, every comma, every. So I think for me, it was kind of a progressive realization that I had something that was distinctly me that protected me from the dangers of passivity, if you will.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I guess that answers the question of how does passivity change how you perceive yourself, right?
It did.
And how do these breakout moments change how you perceive yourself? So after having those experiences within, the drum major, how did that change your trajectory into higher ed?
Well, I think it changed me in that I knew that I could be a leader. I knew that I could command respect. I knew that I could lead a group. I could convince them to step in the right direction, literally and figuratively. And I knew that that I could command a stage, and that's a stage in essence, right? And so I think that was the impetus that really allowed me to go into higher education as a student and think that I could be a band director, right? Because I went to college to be a band director.
Wow.
And so, oh yeah. And so
I'm learning all the time.
so I went to school for music education, and I was going on that path to do that, and it was only through that I discovered I really wanted to be in political science and public relations. But that's what led me in there, is this belief that I could continue to do this work, and I've done it in other fashions and in other ways, right?
So it wasn't necessarily that particular role. It was the breakout moment.
Yeah, the breakout moment and the continued moment of being a leader in the community, in the marching band, seeing myself in the newspaper, right? Because our local newspaper would go out and take pictures and things,
Of course,
right?
it was you.
Yeah,
Why wouldn't they?
well, it
You're
was
only
Rockdale.
28 now,
I mean, well, yeah, and that too, right? They needed a young, fresh face. He's still here today, but I think it showed not only me, but it also showed my parents and the community that I had aspirations, right?
Well, it changed the stereotype.
Yeah.
You dramatically changed the stereotype. My sister, in fact, was a drum major, Veronica. And she also, I mean, in Brownsville.
Everybody's
Mexican. We've already had that discussion. But yeah, it definitely, I think for you, where you were in your very, white-centered hometown, it probably distinctly changed how people perceived you. And so that had ripple effects, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, I don't know. I want to think about how this realization of charming passivity, and I'm going to go back to the quote one more time. Mexicans have a charming passivity. I wouldn't want to take that away. Would you?
Yes.
Wow.
I would.
Okay.
And the quote is about Mexicans in general relative to the Chicano movement and the school walkouts. But really, it's about Latinos and Latinx people, right? Because I would say most of us from a Latinx heritage or ethnicity really prioritize respect, prioritize manners, etiquette,
Absolutely.
in our own constructed way, and that's perceived as passive.
And I think that's interesting because there is an element of self-control that I see within my own children that is not just there because they know that Brock and I expect them to behave everywhere they go. It is there because they are able to control their behaviors.
Yeah.
Because they are able to exist in social spaces and not be disruptive. Like, it is a self-control.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm not teaching my children to be passive. I'm teaching them how to operate within society in a way that is, I'm not trying to say not disruptive, but I guess I'm teaching them to be observers. And I'm doing it purposely.
Sure, but how does society perceive that?
So,
and that's the question, right? Because I think what we're discovering is, or what I'm concluding, is that my mom would say that she raised me the same way.
Well, sure, and you know how I feel about it.
Yeah.
Like, we've already talked about this, so just, just kind of a inside view. We talk about these things ahead of time. So he knows how I feel about passivity within our culture. I want to see more energy. I want to see organizing. I want to see Latino people, Latinx people embrace the responsibility of challenging issues within higher ed, issues within political circles. I want us talking and organizing around voting rights, around immigration, around reproductive rights, around redistricting, within the state.
Around COVID.
Around COVID.
Immunization.
Absolutely.
Around buffoonery and
Right.
local politics, right?
And I think that we have that ability. So what is holding us back?
Well, I think part of it is that we're not monolithic, right? That there are different views
Agree.
within the Latinx community. I think the other part of it is that we just don't value organizing in that way for those movements.
But we'll have barbecues.
We'll have a quinceañera.
We'll organize the heck out of a quinceañera.
Sure. We'll all go to the pulga and take our pictures.
Not just that. I mean, we're going to get the padrinos for everything, for the
And
wedding,
we can
for
organize
the
that
baptism,
for the cake,
for
for
everything.
the dimes, for the
What
road.
is the deal?
I think it's a sense of passivity. We're not meant for politics. We're not meant to have a seat at the table. The governorship, the senatorship, whether it's a state, and we're breaking those barriers, right?
We are.
On local levels.
But do they really believe that? Do we really believe that we're not meant?
I don't know that we believe it. We don't think that we are. Believing and thinking and foreseeing are two different things. Believing is, yeah, mija, I believe in you. You can do that. Foreseeing that as a goal, an achievable goal, and something you work towards is not what we see.
Why doesn't it feel like a sense of duty to everyone? So why do people not feel like it is, why do we as Latinos not feel that it is our duty and our responsibility to organize around issues that matter to us? I mean, it's necessary. The 2020, the 2022 elections are coming up.
Yeah.
Like, is anyone feeling that sense of urgency, that sense of responsibility? I signed up to be like a volunteer deputy registrar.
Yeah.
Like, I feel the urgency that we must do something. What am I fighting? Like, what are the challenges for me as a Latina who wants other Latinas to operate in this circle with me?
Yeah.
I see them, but how do I counter those?
Well, I think that
We.
there's a whole bunch of things at play. One of the things that's at play is that that stereotype exists of us, not only amongst ourselves, but amongst society, right? And how do we leverage it and how do we change it? Well, one of the things that I think that's eerily interesting is that mainstream media doesn't have people who look like us. Think of political commentaries. Think of nightly news shows. Think of Fox, CNN, MSNBC. Do you see anyone representing the Latinx voice?
Of course not. And it bothers me because
Right.
I went to college. I went to U of H and went into the communications program because I was going to be the Mexican Barbara Walters.
Yeah, Barbara, you can still make
Well, here I am. I mean, come on.
it. From U of H to this,
Don't
right?
forget to
Hey.
like, subscribe, and share our channel.
But when we think about it,
No, we're not represented.
we're not represented, right?
But Daniel, the tide is turning. The demographics are changing. Isn't it time that we make more serious efforts to get ahead of situations that are going to define how the country works?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, who's having children? Latinas.
Yeah, well,
Who-
and Latinos are impregnating Latinas, so it's a
Okay,
joint
I
effort,
know.
right? Hold on, bros. Latinos are out there like, hey.
He's got you.
Anyway, but my thought is, it's changing. Demographics are shifting.
Yeah,
And the one radical movement that you and I are behind is education.
absolutely.
So every single day we're educating more brown and black students.
That is radical.
It's
right.
really radical, right? And time will tell if the fruits of our labor will ever come to having these drastic movements change. But if people of our culture are inherently passive, they're going to be passive in registering to vote. They're going to be passive in voting. They're going to be passive in organizing, right? And so when we
It's this
think
blanket effect.
of this, right, it's really this blanket effect, and we have to get at the heart of where does the passivity come from? And I think it's misunderstood. It comes from manners, respect, and really honoring other people in daily engagements.
I agree, but does it also come from fear?
It comes from embarrassment. It comes from shame.
For
it comes
me,
from fear.
For
Right.
me, it was fear and shame. Not fear, sorry, more shame. Because growing up poor, I did well in the classroom, and attention for that was great, but attention beyond that was not okay because I didn't want anyone to know how poor I was. I never had hot water, ever. Like, we couldn't afford to fix the water heater for my entire young life. That is poor, right? Boiling water, for baths in the winter. Not that it got very cold in the valley, but still, it was cold. And so I hid that. And so my passivity, I think in my young life at least, until I was able to use words to free myself, was the result of shame.
Well, and think about
But
our
there's
students
fear.
today in the DACA movement, in immigration, and coming to a college, an institution that you don't know, and being asked about your residency status, right? There's fear, and it's more likely than not that those students will be more passive to being told what to do, what to bring, and they're fearful of deportation. They're fearful of people finding out how poor they are. They're fearful of people finding out how many people live in their house.
So you're saying that for them, passivity is saving their lives almost.
In an essence, yeah. So until that cycle is broken, until the demographics have completely shifted,
And immigration policy
becomes a resolved instance, which it's not
we actually
going
work
to be,
on it, right?
It will continue to perpetrate until the sheer numbers outweigh people, right? And that's where I think there's a really good article in my newly released book, edited book, right, by Nolan Cabrera.
I'm sure the book is going to be right here in a graphic
Right
or an
here,
image, right?
right?
There it is. Buy the book, it's only $250.
It's a classroom textbook.
Feeling very passive around that. I don't know if I can do it.
It's a classroom textbook for graduate
I don't know if I
students.
can press buy.
So there's an article, a chapter from Nolan Cabrera, who's a professor out at the University of Arizona, that's talking about the fear of the brown planet. Right, and it's really talking about this idea that the majority currently may be fearful of a brown planet and what's to come.
I think that's exactly why I think that's why Texas is where it is, Daniel.
That's why, and regressing.
I believe it. I believe that what we're seeing in terms of voting rights and reproductive, rights, I think all of this is the result of the fear, the white-centered world's fear of
a brown planet. Yeah.
Because it's going to happen.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the planet is already brown.
Of course. We are the global majority. We are part of the global majority.
So it's very interesting, very interesting.
I have to read that article. I'm just going to borrow your copy, so I can make some copies.
So what are your takeaways from today? Like, what do you think about in closing about charming passivity? What are you going to do differently? What do you advise for students? What do you advise for higher ed administrators? Those out there.
I think first of all, because I tend to be very upfront and vocal and bold in my approach, I think I want to be more intentional about recognizing the reasons for people's passivity.
Yeah.
Because I can be hella judgmental, right? Like,
we can be.
That is not one of my weaknesses. So, but I really, what I feel like in our pre-talk, right before we started filming, I really feel a sense of responsibility to examine the roots of passivity within individuals that I see greatness in. Yeah. I see greatness in so many, particularly Latinas around me, and I feel like we need them. We need them to do this work. And I believe, like you said, they're probably doing the work, but perhaps that sense of passivity might have that blanket effect on things like branding and self-promotion and strategy and networking,
and job responsibilities.
Absolutely.
Right, working hard and letting your boss take credit for it. Oh yes, no. Make sure everybody knows you did that.
Not
right
happening.
So in terms of that, I really challenge our LatinX learners out there, both students, higher ed, scholars, faculty, staff, administration, to dare to not be passive.
Yeah.
right? In your interactions with your students, with colleagues. And that's not being disrespectful. That is not saying you have a bill of rights to be ugly,
Right.
but know that you're at the table. You're at the table for a reason. And the perception of passivity can be negative on you. So I don't want to say aggressive, be aggressive, be aggressive. Cheer.
Hey, you were the band major, you're not the band major, and not the cheerleader.
But stand your ground. Know what you're doing. Know that you're doing it well.
Yes.
And get and take credit for what you do.
I think that absolutely, and there is a way to be vocal and be, what do we say, proper about it. There's a word that we use in higher ed, and I can't think of it right now.
Collegial.
Diplomatic. To be diplomatic, right? There's a way to do that. And I think you and I have figured out how to do that. We know.
And we know
Right.
at times where we don't have to be, where
Right.
I can't be.
Right, absolutely. But I think that the main thing is exercise that muscle.
Yeah.
Exercise your voice. Practice with it. And y'all, practicing can be so many different things. I mean, I live with my phone. It is how I write speeches. It is how I write articles. It is how I do everything. You can use the space of your car to ride down the road and practice talking out your non-passive behaviors. Practice speaking up for yourself. It is not something that may be intuitive to you. It may be something that you have to work on, and you should embrace that technique of practicing non-passive behaviors. You should speak up for yourself because we're here to speak up for you, so someone has your back.
So in closing, we challenge you to be charming, but not passive, and also to like, subscribe, and share our channel. This episode as well. Do you have any final thoughts or a grito we'd like to have a shout out to any of our colleagues?
Yeah, I think many of you know that I lost a dear friend recently, Fernando Benavides Jr., who was the last person that we interviewed for this show. And he was an amazing advocate. He was a rising activist. He was an incredible educator, passionate about his students, passionate about the state of the world, and hopeful about the future. And so this episode is dedicated to Fernando, to Rachel, to his father Fernando, and to all of his siblings, and especially his mom. Thanks for watching.